So, a story now from that first heard when I was appearing at Whitby Folk Week for the first time ever, many years ago. A story that's set up about 6 miles up the coast from Whitby in a place called Runswick Bay. Now, there's a cluster of cottages in Runswick Bay that exchange hands for extortionate amounts of money these days. But there's one cottage amongst that cluster of cottage that every sort of 2 or 3 years goes on sales, you know? People sell up and move on every 2 or 3 years. And this is the cottage I'd like to tell you a story about. Because many years ago, that house, that cottage was owned by a man called Jack, or as the locals called him, Crookback Jack, on account of his curved spine. And he was a carpenter. He was a good carpenter, apparently. He lived with his wife and his daughter, Anna. And everything would have been fine, an uneventful life, except Jack started to drink. And you know, Jack wasn't one of those humorous, amusing kind of drunks. No, he was the opposite. He was a mean, vicious kind of drunk. And the more he drank, the more he beat his wife. And the more he drank, the more frequent those beatings became. Until one night when he was laid unconscious from drink, she slipped away from the cottage and was never seen or heard of again. Now Jack, every time he would look at the face of his daughter, he would see the face of his wife staring back at him. And that filled him with rage and anger and resentment. And you know, if little Anna ever questioned his drinking, woe betide, well, he would punish her in ways that even 200 years ago, it was considered harsh, too much. And then, like many drunks, he would sober up and feel remorseful. He would sober up and place his hand on his heart and swear it would never happen again. But of course it did, time and time again. Well, now Jack had been drinking for several days. And into the inn walked 3 men, 3 strangers. "Ah, are you Jack? Are you Jack the carpenter?" He just about managed to mumble the words. Who's asking? "Ah, just 3 men," they said. 3 men who were interested and excited by craftsmanship. "Come, let us buy you a pint." They placed a coin in his hand. He bought himself a pint, but of course he'd done a lot more. He'd accepted the king's coin. Jack had been press ganged. And before he knew anything, well, these hands were throwing him and tumbling him into a cart. And the next time Jack opened his eyes, he was on the open sea. You can imagine how he cursed and swore as the alcohol still seared through his body. 3 days he was in that state, and finally when he dried up, well, they set him to work. And what a fine ship it was. A good quality carpenter, well, he was worth his weight in gold and necessary to that ship's success. And they say a strange thing happened, you know. They say after sort of 3 or 4 weeks, well, the sun started to bronze his body. They said after climbing up and down the rigging, well, his limbs, his muscles strengthened. They said even his back slightly straightened. They said he started taking care and attention to his work, unlike care and attention that he hadn't shown for so many years. And after a year of this, finally he was allowed to go back home. And all he could think about was seeing Anna, was making amends, making reparations for the damage that he'd done. When he reached Runswick Bay, it was the dead of night, and what a dirty, miserable night it was. He managed to force open the cottage door. In the darkness, he made his way up to his room, and there was a layer of dust on his bedsheet. He shook off and buried himself amongst those bedsheets. Soon he was in a deep sleep. But his sleep was interrupted by a sound. And at first he couldn't figure out where it was coming from. It sounded like a pulse, like a heartbeat almost. Digga-da, digga-da, digga-da. And Jack made a mental note. He would prune back the branches of the tree that were knocking against the side of the cottage. Just one more job of a whole list that he would have to complete to make this house into a home again for him and Anna. And soon he was back into a deep sleep. Now in the morning, well, the cottage took on a completely different aspect as the sun was streaming through those dusty windows. He ran to the neighbour's door. He knocked, and at first she didn't recognise him. "It's me. It's Jack." "Jack, we all thought you were dead." No, I've been at sea. Where's Anna? Who's been looking after Anna?" "Oh, Jack, have you not heard?" "Heard what?" "You better come inside." She poured him a steaming mug of tea. "Well, see, we were used to you disappearing for days on end, Jack. That was nothing new. But it was only after 3 or 4 weeks when people started talking. Nobody had seen Anna doing chores, chopping wood, putting out washing. And so we searched. We searched every single inch of that cottage. And then, Jack, we saw the door. Do you remember that door?" And a little memory came back to him. a cupboard under the stairs that you had locked from outside, and now it was slowly coming back to him. I was a different man then. Well, they broke open the lockjack, and then they saw what was left of poor Anna. And you know what the saddest thing was? There was no signs of scratching or scraping. How terrified must she have been inside that place? But she was more scared of upsetting you, of angering you. All they saw were these little scuff marks, black scuff marks on the inside of the door and on the walls. And they couldn't figure out what it was until they pulled out their body. And when they pulled out her body and they opened her hand, well, there, cupped in her hand, was a black bouncing ball. You see, to stop herself from going insane in the darkness, she was bouncing that ball in that small space. What an awful end for a beautiful girl. What an awful end, Jack. Nobody deserves to go like that. Jack turned without saying a single word. He left Runswick Bay, he left that part of North Yorkshire and was never seen again. But of course that cottage is still there. He still exchanges hands for huge amounts of money. But every 2-3 years it goes back on sale. People complain of an uneasiness, a restlessness there. Sounds in the middle of the night, you know? Like a heartbeat, like a pulse. And some people say, oh, it's just an overhanging branch tapping against the side of the cottage. Maybe it's the soul of a young girl crying for her father to free her. Or maybe it's just a bouncy ball knocking against the door. Dugga-dug, dugga-dug, dugga-dug.